My name is Dr. Chris Jenkins, and I am the CEO of the Orianne Society and the host of the Snake Talk podcast, the podcast where you learn about nature's most feared, maligned, and persecuted animals. I invite you to listen to this conversation, and maybe you'll find that what you perceive as fear is actually rooted in a deep fascination. Welcome to the Snake Talk podcast. I am here with Dr. Lynne Isbell. She is a distinguished professor in the Department of Anthropology at UC Davis, and I'm really excited about today's episode. It's maybe a little different in some ways, and then it's going to be not exclusively focused on snakes, but what we're going to talk today about is snakes and primates and the evolution of primate vision. So I'm really fascinated about this topic. Harry Green, a close colleague of mine, has had me thinking about snakes and primates for quite some time. So just a great topic. And this vision question is kind of interesting to me too, because as you all know, I give a lot of presentations to communities and groups on snakes, and I gave one last night actually. And I often, when I'm trying to talk to people about the senses that a snake have, oftentimes I'll compare it to a human's senses, and I often talk about vision in humans as one of, or kind of our go-to sense, meaning that if you hear something, or if you feel something, or you smell something, typically a human would look and use our vision to try to further identify that. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about where that may have come from. So welcome to the podcast, Lynne. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I think this will be a fun conversation.
Yeah, me too. Well, I like to start our episodes and learn a little bit about our guests. And typically the first question I ask has to do with like the origin of people's interest in snakes, and if it kind of developed as a child, or later in life, because it's very eccentric. But you've really focused your career around the primate side of our discussion today, largely. And so I guess my first question for you would be, what is it that originally kind of inspired you to want to learn more about nature and primates and snakes and all of this? Is this something that happened when you were a young child, or is it something that kind of developed later in life? How did that come about for you?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in animals. From an early age, I would spend time on our family vacations watching ground squirrels and looking for deer. When I'd see the road signs saying, deer crossing, I'd always look for the deer and usually never saw any. But it's always been there since I can remember. And so then it was a matter of finding a way to channel that interest into something that would help me survive as an adult. So from my one of my brothers had a pet gopher snake and mice, and I grew up with dogs and cats and a duck and a goose, and I had a rabbit at one time. Of course, as a young girl, I liked horses, so I was an equal opportunity nature lover, I guess. But I think I preferred mammals more than anything else. And so I went through college, had this great opportunity to design my own program at what was then called an experimental college. It was called Johnston College at the time. And We created our own areas of interest, and mine was ethology. I think I was the only person in the school that ever had a degree in ethology. And so the study of animal behavior in the wild. And from there, it was, how do I go further with this? And I didn't really have a way to do it. There were opportunities that didn't work out. I had once attempted to work with wolves in Indiana in a captive situation with a professor at Purdue University, and that ended up not working out. I had an opportunity to census seabirds off the California coast for a week. That was good, but I didn't know anything about birds, so of course they wouldn't hire me. So I kind of waffled around. I thought maybe. When I was younger, I thought maybe I could be a guide dog for the blind trainer of dogs. And I wrote a letter to an organization that did that, asking about opportunities. This was when I was in junior high or high school. And the letter that came back was so negative, it really discouraged me. Oh, we don't hire very many people, and blah, blah, blah. And so, so I kept looking for ways to do this. And then in college, I found a book in the college bookstore, of course, by Jane Goodall. And on the cover, it was there was a picture of her walking in the forest. And I thought, well, this is interesting. Let me read this. It kind of looks like me. So, let me see what this is about. And so I read it and I realized, oh my goodness, you can actually get paid to study animals in the field. And so that's what I decided I would try to do. And again, it was hard to figure out how to do that. At one time, I decided that maybe the best way for me to be around animals in the field was to be a safari guide. So I took classes in how to be a tour director so that I could be a guide in Africa. And I did a couple of those trips. That was good. I got to see gorillas myself, not on my dime, got paid for it. But I just kept going, trying to figure out a way to do what I wanted to do, which is to be around animals in the field. And then I moved to Davis. And volunteered for a year out at the primate center there. It was my first exposure to primates. I had been an ungulate person before that. And I realized that they're much more interesting than ungulates. They actually have social lives that are pretty amazing, pretty intricate. And what was fun about it was to be able to recognize individuals by the way they walk, by their faces, their gestalt, really, and that kind of hooked me on primates. And so that led to an opportunity to go to Uganda, and I was there for 2 years with my partner, who was a graduate student here at Davis at the time, and he was a birder. So he also did that while he was studying primates in Uganda, and eventually he went back to birding and became an ecologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I continued on with primates. So I studied red colobus monkeys for 2 years there, and then came back and was admitted to graduate school here at Davis. And at the time, Davis had just started a graduate program in animal behavior, and it was perfect for me. And so the second time I applied, I got in, and that led me on to the academic track. And from there, I became a professor at Rutgers University for 3 years, and then I was hired back at UC Davis in anthropology. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's quite a life summed up in the in a short amount of time. But one thing that struck me there was you talked about working with the the dogs used for, used to assist the blind. Was there any, your future research interests in vision? Do you think there was any, not just an interest in animals, but you had an interest in sensory systems and vision in particular, and that's what drew you to that? Or was that just kind of random chance that
it was so chance. I took a physiological psychology course, and it focused on vision, and I was thinking, why do I have to learn this stuff? This has nothing to do with animal behavior. And then later on, I realized that, well, that information kind of has something to do with what I'm doing now. So I was glad in retrospect that I took that course.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I'd mention from your kind of your career trajectory is, you mentioned Jane Goodall and how she was, I don't know how you would put it, but kind of like a role model for you. I'm assuming over your career, you've had the opportunity to meet her. But I think it's really important for people in all fields, really, but for scientists to have the opportunity to have mentors and role models, and who look like them. When you pick up that book in the library, you're like, oh, she looks like me. I can do this too. And so I think that's really important. And just so you know, how I ended up reaching out to you to do this episode is because a young woman scientist reached out to me and was like, you should have this woman on your podcast. So you are doing the same thing for other women scientists right now. So
well, I hope so. It'd be nice to carry on that tradition.
Yeah. So you've been, it sounds like even in those early years, we're going to get into more recent times, but you've been on many adventures all around the world, and I'm assuming spent a lot of time in various places. But you talked about in particular working in Africa. What was that like? I mean, what your first experiences going to Africa, and I'm assuming, given you're interested in behavior, you were really spending a lot of time, like similar to what Jane Goodall would do, a lot of time in the wild with these animals, looking at social systems. You just have any thoughts on those very early days of being in these wild places with these animals?
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California, and you can see the horizon. I'm not used to having lots of trees in my way where my visibility is obscured. And so I got to Uganda, and I was in a tropical forest where really the trees are so thick that you can't see very far. And so I felt a kind of feeling of claustrophobia in a way. And I have to admit that the first 6 weeks of my time there were really hard. I felt as if I didn't really know myself at all, because I thought, here's what I wanted to do. I've wanted to do this for all my life that I can remember, and yet I'm hating it. It was a dream that turned into a nightmare. And that lasted about 6 weeks until, and things turned around completely when I started to learn the names of the tree species there. And then to find a group of red colobus monkeys that I could follow and get to know as individuals. And then so after 6 weeks, I turned it around, and I loved it there. It was hard. It was hard to live there. It was right after Idi Amin left, and he destroyed the infrastructure of the country. There were no processed kinds of foods or even supplies to get a hold of, really. I mean, my biggest feeling of accomplishment was that I never ran out of toilet paper in the 2 years that I was there. It was rare to find toilet paper in the nearest town, so it was tough, but it was a really good experience, and I'm glad that I had the really tough experience in the field first before I went on to other field sites, which were so much easier. I felt like I was in paradise in all of the other places that I went to, and they were all in East Africa, Kenya after Uganda. They all had. I ended up going to the savannah after Kibale, and I felt much more at home in this kind of open environment of the savanna woodlands.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Well, so so you grew up loving animals, definitely had this, maybe leaned your interest a little bit towards mammals, as you mentioned, and, were able to kind of early in your career work, with that inspiration from Jane Goodall, work towards working with primates, and you're moving along this academic trajectory, and find yourself at Davis. So how did the snakes come into it for you? Was this like, something you experienced when you were in a faraway place like Africa and you saw a snake and got you thinking, like how did snakes and primates come into the same equation for you?
Yeah, it was really weird. I was not thinking about snakes at all. My original question that I wanted to resolve was, why do female primates in the New World, in South and Central America, why do they so readily disperse from their natal home ranges where they grew up? Why do they do that? But why don't female Old World primates, why do they stay at home so much? What's going on there? Why is there this difference in dispersal? And so, I had been interested in the question of dispersal for quite a long time. And one of the main costs of dispersal is greater risk of predation. And so I thought, well, maybe the New World primates don't have as great selection pressure from predators as Old World primates do. And so I started looking into the evolution of the large cats. We know that snakes, felids, and raptors are the main predators of primates. So, and I had been, first of all, I focused on cats because in two of the places I studied primates, leopards decimated the population while I was there. So that was on my mind. So I started looking into when cats arrived in the New World, into South America. And turns out very recently, only about 3 million years ago, when the Isthmus of Panama formed, and they could come in from North America to South America. So that started to sound good to me. And as I was reading about cats, there was one article that jumped out at me, and it was about a retrovirus that cats have, that felids have, that is closely related to a retrovirus that primates have. And now that we know about how retroviruses get transmitted, HIV is one example of that, of a retrovirus. We know that there's some sort of exchange of bodily fluids of one kind or another. And so my interpretation was that this retrovirus that is present in cats, now part of the genome, an endogenous retrovirus, occurred at some point because a cat bit into a primate that had that retrovirus. And so it gets passed on. And so I thought, well, that's interesting, and that fits. And then in passing, in that same article, there was a reference to the same sort of thing in snakes. And so I thought, well, what about snakes? When did snakes get to South America? So that led me on to this path that I couldn't get off of until I got rid of the question about dispersal. I started to think about snakes and snake evolution, and then it turned into, well, I know that New World primates differ from Old World monkeys and apes in terms of their color vision, that all the Old World monkeys and apes that we know of have trichromatic color vision. They can distinguish reds from greens very easily, like we can, most of us. Mm-hmm. But there is a difference in the New World monkeys. All males are red-green colorblind, except for one genus, howler monkeys, where everybody can see reds and greens. And some females can distinguish reds from greens, but other females can't. They're like the males. And this is even within a single group of the same species. You've got this diversity of color vision. And so I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe there's some connection there. And I thought, well, let me look at the Malagasy prosimians to see what's going on there with snakes and Malagasy prosimians. And it turns out, well, I found out that there are no venomous snakes that are deadly in Madagascar. And they have really simple visual systems, the simplest of all of the primates. And I started to see a pattern that we've got no venomous snakes in Madagascar, really simple visual systems in the primates there. We've got visual systems of the New World monkeys that are intermediate between the best, the Old World monkeys and apes, and the Malagasy prosimians. And it turns out that venomous snakes didn't get to South America until later they evolved in probably Asia, maybe Africa, but probably Asia. And it took them a while to get to South America. So the primates in South America had interrupted coexistence with venomous snakes, whereas the Old World monkeys and apes always had to deal with venomous snakes. So there was this sort of basic correlation between the quality of vision and the extent to which primates have coexisted with venomous snakes. And that's what really got me going on it.
Interesting. Well, I want to ask you about the venomous snakes because I'm curious, but we'll do that in a bit. I want to talk about venomous snakes versus, which are obviously could be deadly to primates, but also there are other snakes in the world of other taxonomic groups that could be predators of primates. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's talk. So you wrote a book, The Fruit, the Tree, and the Serpent, and that talks about a lot of what we're discussing today. And you kind of kick off that book with a chapter that talks about Adam and Eve, and even the title, has to do with that. And we've done a whole episode with a theologian who talked about snakes in the Bible, but maybe just kind of set the context for, why you kind of started this book and how you framed it, titled it and did this introductory chapter relative to the story of Adam and Eve.
Yeah. So, as I was doing my research, it seemed to me that there were some good scientific parallels to this story, and I began to think that, maybe people in the past were just really good naturalists, and they came up with this idea before the scientific evidence was ever out there, that there's a connection between primates and trees and fruit that allowed them to evolve better vision. Okay, so that fit in with the story of Adam and Eve, and the idea is that primates were able to evolve into a separate order of mammals, largely because of their visual sense. That's the thing that really distinguishes them from other mammals. So you have to, if you want to explain the origin of primates, i.e., Adam and Eve, then you have to focus on the visual sense. And so in the story of Adam and Eve, well, Eve eats from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, right? And her eyes are opened. And I think that's a good way to describe in a nutshell how primate evolution occurred. Primates, the original, the ancestral primates were probably nocturnal, tree-living animals, and so they would roost in the daytime in trees where light could penetrate, unlike burrowing mammals or cave-living mammals, whatever. And so they had an opportunity because of the sunlight to be able to expand their vision, and there's evidence that some of the earliest primates were not only insect eaters, but also fruit and nectar or flower eaters. And so this increase in this ability to take in a lot of glucose, a lot of sugars, was also something that allowed their vision to expand, their brains to expand, because glucose it provides a lot of good energy for brain activity. And so there's the fruit, and they're living in the tree of knowledge. And so it all tied in to the story of Adam and Eve, I thought. So that's where it came about.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So snakes are one of the most persecuted groups of animals in the world, but we are dedicated to changing that. If you like what we've been discussing here on the Snake Talk podcast, here's an opportunity to turn that inspiration into action. Head over to www.orian.org and explore how you can support the Orian Society. Click on Take Action on our menu to make a difference. Talk a little bit. You did talk about a little bit the variation and vision among different primates, kind of in different parts of the world. But I think many people know there are a lot of mammals in the world that don't see as we do. Like a white-tailed deer would be a good example. They're the colors that they see and don't see, and how their eyes focus or don't focus. More. The way I envision their vision is more like kind of like very good peripheral vision everywhere that senses movements, for example. But just talk a little bit about like vision in primates. How it works. A lot of us, we're humans, so we have a pretty good feeling about it. But talk about vision in primates, and then maybe go a little more depth into how that varies in different parts of the world.
Okay. So vision is in the brain. First of all, I mean, we have our eyes that we can see, but most of the action is going on inside the brain. I had to learn a lot of neuroscience in order to understand the visual sense. I think that I'll probably try to avoid talking in their jargon for this, because it's pretty complicated. A lot of words that people don't usually speak of when they're talking in normal English. But so to simplify things, primates have forward-facing eyes, more forward-facing than most other mammals. Some of the predatory mammals like cats tend to have forward-facing eyes as well. But one of the key things is the forward-facing eyes of primates that allows them to have better depth perception than animals that have more laterally placed eyes. And that depth perception can enable them to see. Imagine a snake on the ground, and there's not that much distance from the ground to the top of the snake. Okay, primates are better able to have this ground figure discrimination than other mammals can. And on top of that, they don't need movement in order to see snakes, in order to see objects in their environment. They can tune in to them without the movement, whereas a lot of other mammals may need movement in order to detect the object in front of them. And so that's a big key difference between primates and other mammals. Of course, the color vision is there, but it's not universal to primates, it's color vision, as I mentioned before. And so within primates, you get a diversity of visual skills. And as I mentioned, the Malagasy prosimians have a very simple visual system. There's not much trade-off between olfaction and vision in the Malagasy primates, but there's a lot of trade-off in the anthropoids, the monkeys and apes. So as vision improves, olfaction goes down. There's just not that much space in the brain to accommodate both well. And so the Malagasy prosimians, all of the prosimians, even the nocturnal ones in Asia and Africa, have simple visual systems. If there's a fovea at all, that's the pit in the back of the retina that allows you to have really good central vision. You can distinguish small objects in the environment. And you can read, if you have a fovea, for example, if you're human. And the prosimians don't have that, so their vision isn't very good as far as primates are concerned. Then you go to the New World, and I mentioned already the differences in color vision. But within the brain, there's a lot more variation in the visual sense in New World monkeys than there is in the Old World monkeys. And I would attribute this to, again, this timing of venomous snakes into the New World. By the time that the venomous snakes got to the New World, the monkeys were already there, and they had started to differentiate into their different families and genera. And so they ended up having to resolve the problem of how do we see these venomous snakes independently of each other. So there's a lot more variation in the visual sense within the brain in the New World monkeys than there are in African monkeys or Old World monkeys and apes. And that's one reason why we can use, say, a macaque species as a model, a medical model for human vision, because they're so much like ours. So,
Yeah.
and that I attribute to the consistent, uniform exposure over evolutionary time to venomous snakes, starting with the ancestor of all of the Old World monkeys and apes back,
Yeah.
45, 50 million years ago.
Yeah. So in the book you have a chapter on vision and fear, and when that kind of makes me think about, like, imagine someone who is sitting at home watching their TV and is afraid of horror movies, say, and like a trailer comes on advertising a horror movie. Not that I've ever done this, but no, but like, a person who's really afraid of it can divert their eyes and they can still be getting the sense, hearing what's going on in that trailer, but they're not seeing it.
Yeah, that's me. That's me.
And yeah, no, that is me too. With certain types of horror, like, it'll just stick in my brain if I see it, but I can hear the whole thing and it doesn't induce fear. So talk a little bit about vision versus other senses and fear in primates.
So I wrote about fear. At the time I was putting this together, there was no direct evidence about this connection between snakes and primate evolution. And so I looked for whatever indirect evidence I could come up with. And it turns out that psychologists have been very interested in phobias for a long time. And the strongest phobia in humans is the fear of snakes. So I looked at the research that they did. And again, they were focused on phobias. And so, really extreme fear. And so I picked up on that for the book. But I want to say now that after nearly 20 years after the idea came to me, that it's not so much fear, I would say, as you can have the emotion of fear when you see snakes, but what I think stands out more is a reaction to snakes that may or may not come with that emotion. But the physical reaction may look to us as if it's fear. So, for example, if you're walking down a trail and suddenly you jump back or you freeze and you realize in front of you there's a snake, a rattlesnake or whatever, we may interpret that behavior of ours, jumping back or freezing, as fearful, but we don't necessarily feel the emotion of fear. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I want to qualify that chapter in the book and pull back a little bit from fear as a sort of a universal reaction to snakes both in primates and non-human primates and in humans.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, we learn science is a constantly building field, so that's great. Well, let's a couple questions. I mentioned it earlier, but why, if snakes are driving, kind of evolution of vision in primates, and you've seen these correlations as you talked about with primate vision and distribution of snakes, etc. Why not other predators, whatever it might be, a cat or a crocodilian or whatever it might be. And then within the snakes, why not, you keep mentioning venomous snakes. Why not, some of the large like pythons and boas that might actually eat some of these as opposed to just envenomating them? And I mean, I know there are venomous snakes that could eat some primates, but a lot of venomous snakes would not be able to eat the primate. They would just envenomate them, kill them, and leave them. So, well, I'm just curious. You've already hinted at this, talking about, is it biogeography, timing, all of these things. But why not other predators? Or maybe I shouldn't say why not, but how much are other predators or other types of snakes that are maybe more predatory on primates? How much do you think they could be driving the evolution of vision? Or do you think it is primarily venomous snakes?
No. In fact, it's the constrictors that probably started the whole process. When they showed up, the modern placental mammals were also showing up, and I think those mammals provided a good food supply for large-mouthed constricting snakes, and so they appeared about 100 million years ago. And I think that constrictors, as a selective force, were initially responsible for the origin of primates. The venomous snakes for the variation that we see in primate vision, but constrictors were certainly the impetus for the origin of primates. They've been around about 100 million years, and their visual cues haven't changed. That's a key thing here. They have always looked like, once they got rid of their legs, they have their scale patterns. They've always looked the same over that long a period of time. Now, you might talk about other predators. That, sure, primates have to stay away from other predators, but the theropods, dinosaurs that were around at the time, well, they're gone now. So whatever visual cues they might have had that primates or proto-primates or mammals could have used to identify them and stay away from them, they're gone. And evolution has a way of pruning things that are not useful anymore, particularly in areas like the brain, which are very energetically demanding. So you think of subterranean, like mole rats, who sort of have degenerated eyes. They don't need them anymore to see form vision. And so, so they have lost that ability. And so whatever ability that mammals might have had to detect theropod dinosaurs would have been useless after 65 million years ago, when they went extinct. And then you've got other ancient carnivores like the creodonts. And they could have been problematic for primates, but they would have appeared after primates had evolved, and they would have had the same mammalian basic visual system that all therian mammals have. And I'm saying that snakes were largely responsible for the kind of vision that placental mammals have today at the very basic level. And then primates just took advantage of the opportunity because of the environment that they lived in, living in trees, active at night, sleeping in the light, having a diet of fruits and nectar. That allowed them to expand their visual system where it wasn't available to other mammals to do.
Yeah.
So that's I don't know if that answers your question well enough, but
yeah, no, that's perfect. So we, really, it's kind of what a lot of this conversation has been about. But by kind of introed, the conversation using this, this term that you developed called snake detection theory. And so, how would you define what is snake detection theory? We've talked about a lot of the components here. When did you really kind of put all this together, this hypothesis, and kind of, create this term we're talking about, snake detection theory? How would you define it, I guess, first is the question. And then, and then talk a little bit about kind of when you put it all together and really formally kind of coined that term.
Yeah, I don't remember when I coined it, actually.
But I mean, in a relative sense, is it recent, after you put this together after years of research, or is it kind of something you came up with on the front end as a hypothesis and you started working on all these, these different components to it?
No. So the snake detection theory simply could be defined as it's the ability to detect and identify snakes rapidly. Okay, and primates, as I've been mentioning, seem to have a special ability to do that better than other mammals can. So there are two types of visual systems that primates have, probably other mammals. Sort of an ancient one that is subcortical, and that allows vertebrates to detect danger quickly. They may not know, they may not be consciously aware of what they're detecting, but they can react. So frogs can orient toward or away from elongate objects or whatever, depending on if they're prey or predators. But primates are really good at this, and so I'm sure you've had the experience of being able to maneuver away from an object that you didn't know was a snake until like a split second later, and you consciously said, there's a rattlesnake or whatever. A lot of herpetologists will know what I'm talking about when they've reacted before they've actually consciously become aware that there's a snake in front of them.
Mm-hmm,
so
exactly.
That's that subcortical visual system that reacts very quickly. And then you've got the conscious visual system that can help you identify the object in front of you as a snake or a rope or a stick that looks like a snake but isn't. And so the snake detection theory outlines how that happens, how those two visual systems co-evolved in primates to make primates really good snake detectors. When I'm out in the field with primates, they always tell me where the snakes are before I can see the snakes myself, always. So I don't have any problems walking around in the bush when I've got primates with me. When I'm away from them, that's when I have to be a lot more alert. So I take advantage of the vision of other primates to help me out when I'm in the field. In terms of the timing, the term that I came up with, I came up with this idea, this theory, hypothesis, whatever you want to call it, before I coined the term, and I was just trying to think of what would work, what would encapsulate the idea as best as I could come up with. And that's the best I could come up with. There might be better ones, but that's what I came up with. And that was probably around, 2001, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned that, you've mentioned multiple times throughout this, discussion that primates are very good at identifying snakes. And there have been multiple studies, kind of experimental lab studies, showing that in primates and non-human primates and in humans. Is that accurate? And maybe just kind of describe, go through that body of literature, but there is a lot of research that shows that is indeed the case in kind of an experimental setting. Is that true? Whether you're passionate about preserving biodiversity, ensuring the survival of threatened species, or simply want to contribute to a healthier planet, there's a role for you. Your support isn't just a contribution, it's an investment in a future where our ecosystems thrive. Go to www.orian.org to donate or become a member today.
Yeah, a lot of studies have shown this. There, some of them have been challenged. So one example is called the visual search paradigm, where you have different objects on a monitor on a computer screen, and the person is supposed to pick the odd one out. And they're faster at picking out snakes as the odd one out than they are, say, lizards or whatever. But that kind of paradigm has come into has come under criticism by people saying, well, that's not a natural environment. That's not normal. Let's try some other things. And so they're working around trying all sorts of different techniques to look at this further, and almost all of them have been supportive of the snake detection theory, of its predictions. There is one paradigm that has been negative, and that's called the inattentional blindness paradigm. And I don't know, maybe you would recognize this as this became popular a while back, where you're watching some people play a basketball game, and you're really intent on the basketball game, and a person in a gorilla suit walks through the court, and people report not having seen the gorilla, even though it's right there and it's pretty obvious. That's inattentional blindness, and so what these other inattentional blindness studies are showing is that there's no attentional bias towards snakes compared to, say, lizards or other animals when you've got that same paradigm. When it's an unexpected object in the environment, you don't see snakes as well as you don't see snakes any better than any other animals. And what I would counter is that in a natural environment, when a person is walking in snake country, they are usually kind of primed, subconsciously or consciously, that there could be a snake around. And so this inattentional blindness situation, where an object is unexpected, that's not going to be the case in the natural environment. Anybody walking around in snake country will probably have in their mind, I could see a snake. So it's not unexpected if they do see a snake necessarily.
Yeah, and most snake species are often very cryptic, and many snake species, their response to, a potential predator, say as a human, would be to stay put and hide. Whereas, a squirrel, their defense response is to run, and they're not quite as cryptic and on and on. But anyways, that's all interesting. So you did mention, you talked about these primates helping you identify where you when you were out in the field, that there was a snake in the vicinity. And so I'm wondering, maybe talk about that a little bit, not just, kind of, we're talking about this high level, kind of, this is what we've observed, and this is how we think everything fits together and how vision is evolved. But talk a little bit about seeing it in person. I mean, I know from what I've read about you, that's the type of biologist you are. You're a natural historian, and you like to spend time in the field. And I'm assuming you have spent a lot of time in the field with primates, observing their behavior. So talk about seeing this actually in motion, maybe not the evolution of it, but seeing snake and primate interactions in the wild.
Yeah, so in the course of following monkeys around, I'm on foot. The ones that I've studied most recently, tend to spend a lot of time on the ground. And so we're both walking around. I'm behind them, and suddenly a vervet monkey, I've studied them the longest, will stand up on its hind legs, look down on the ground, and give a vocalization that we call a chutter, but it's very soft, like that. And that alerts me to the fact that there's a snake around. It also alerts other members of the group, and they gather around, and they may do the same thing. And all the while they're looking at the snake very intently. And so that's the typical experience that I have when I'm following monkeys around and they detect a snake and they tell me where the snake is. Very simple.
So, so primates and humans included, we have this great vision, but I would think that in most cases, like the cases you just gave, and it'd be the same thing for me or most people with a group of primates, that they are actually much more able to identify serpents in the wild. And it seems to me that, a lot of humans quite often miss snakes in the wild. I'm just curious your thoughts on, this ability to identify snakes in non-humans versus humans. Have we lost something here? Are we no longer being selected for by snakes? Or is that no longer a pressure on our evolution?
Well, okay. So a study was done using primates. They actually used primates to help them find snakes in West Africa, in a West African country. And the primates were better at detecting the snakes than the humans were. And these were trained herpetologists. So yeah, the primates seem to be better at it than we are, but I wouldn't say that we've lost anything. I think that if anything, it's because our eyes are farther off the ground than the eyes of other primates are. I think the closer your eyes are to the snake, the better you're going to see them.
Yeah, and there has to be some learned component to this too. It's not all this genetic base, meaning those humans, even though they're herpetologists, live in cities and spend much of their lives, whereas these primates that they're working with spend every day. The young were raised with snakes. It's just an everyday occurrence for them, so they're much more like acclimated to living like that, I would assume, is part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You get a visual search image, and not just snakes, but other things that you're interested in, and you start to see them more often or more reliably than you would if you didn't have that search image.
Yeah. Well, so what does the future hold in terms of, are you still doing research in this arena, writing on this? Are there other people who are looking at this, the idea of, the evolution of primate vision and the role of snakes? What's kind of the future there?
Yeah, so I was recently asked to do an update, to write an update of the snake detection theory now that it's about 20 years old. And so I had the opportunity to go back and look at the literature, do a literature search on what has been done since it's come out. And quite a lot of research has been done over the past 20 years on this topic. And I'm very happy about that. Mostly psychologists and neuroscientists. The paleontologists have not really taken advantage of this opportunity, I would say, to look into it further. So a lot of work is being done, and so I'm in the process of writing up that update, and so it's really got, I sort of got distracted by other things over the past 20 years as well, and so but this is bringing me back to it, and I'm really excited to see where it goes in the next, say, 20 years after this. The techniques that people have to do the experiments on visual detection, it's been amazing what they've been able to do in the last 20 years. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to more of this happening.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to it as well. And I think anything else, anything really big that we didn't touch on that you wanted to speak on relative to, kind of evolution of vision, primates, role of snakes, all of this, anything that's just really critical that we didn't touch on that you think everybody should know?
No, not really. I guess I would want to say that it is a complicated idea in the details. It's a simple idea overall, but in the details is where people get lost. They misunderstand it, and so some of the criticism that has come out over the past, and not much has come out about that, but what criticism has come out is largely because they didn't quite understand the details. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to present it in a simplistic form, but I'm trying. But a lot of it, a lot of it is in the details. So if I guess what I'm trying to say is, if anybody reads any criticism about it, that's okay. I don't mind if somebody criticizes it, but I want them to get it right.
Mm-hmm. And do you think the best way for them to get it is to read your book? I know you said you're doing a second version of that book. When is that due to come out?
I think 2026 is when it'll be published. It'll be a chapter in an edited volume.
Gotcha. Great. Well, I will, for the time being, I will link in the show notes to this episode. I'll link to your book, The Fruit, the Tree, and the Serpent, and I would encourage everybody to read that book and just kind of research this topic and learn more. It's fascinating. So, great. Well, I like to have all of my guests tell me a story. And so let's just imagine that you and I are out, in Uganda or some other faraway place, and we're sitting around the campfire at night, and we just had a great day out looking for snakes and observing primates, and great day in the field. And I ask you to tell me your best snake story.
Well, okay. I don't have as many snake stories as probably your other guests have had, because they are herpetologists and I'm not. But what I'll say, there are two incidences that are kind of linked. And the first one is that when I was in Uganda and I was following red colobus monkeys around, they're arboreal. And so I would have to follow them on the trail system, but they would be in the trees and they could move pretty fast. And so at one point, I was running along a trail trying to catch up with them and going to an area that I didn't know well. So keeping my eyes on them up in the air, up in the trees, and running along. And suddenly I looked down and I saw that my boot had stepped on the back of a small black snake. And I wasn't acrobatic enough to do anything about it, but keep going. And, but I, my vocalization was some sort of a guttural, I didn't scream or anything like that. And the snake was probably just as surprised as I was, and it kept going. It could have been a forest cobra. Don't know, because it happened so quickly. And so then I thought, well, that was stupid. I can't be running in the field anymore. I have to stop running in the field. I can't do that. And so I remembered that until about 12 years later, when I was in Kenya, and I ran into a glade to take a photograph of sunset on Mount Kenya. And it was gorgeous. And I knew that the lighting would change very quickly. So I ran through into the glade to take this picture. And this time my body did cooperate, and I stopped abruptly. I was running and I stopped abruptly about 2 paces away from a cobra. The cobra had sensed me before I sensed it. And when I sort of consciously saw this cobra in front of me, its hood was raised. It was giving me this nice defensive display. And I was so grateful for this ability that primates have to be able to react before they're consciously aware of something dangerous in their environment in front of them. So needless to say, I forgot about the image of the fading sunlight or sunset on Mount Kenya, and I tried to take a photograph of the cobra instead. It's a shaky version, low light version of a cobra. That didn't come out very well, but my goodness. I decided then, okay, I had forgotten that vow of 12 years before. I am not going to run in the bush anymore, ever again. And I never have since then. That's my story.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's a perfect story for this episode. And after you told the first part of the story, I was thinking in my head that I was going to say something like, the headline is "Developer of Snake Detection Theory Gets Killed by Snakes She Doesn't See." But then the second half of the story was amazing in that, you actually, that subconscious, before your mind even registered, I'm looking at a snake, that triggered. So that's amazing. Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation, and just thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it myself.
Great. And I just wanted to thank the audience and tell everybody to remember, snakes are animals too, and it's a privilege to see one in the wild.